Hi, welcome to the Intune Training Show, the place to learn how to use Microsoft Intune, the Steve and Adam Show, and Ben.
Hello.
How you going, Ben?
I'm good. I'm sorry that Adam couldn't be here tonight, but hopefully I'm a worthwhile replacement.
I think so. So what are we going to talk about today?
Today we're going to talk about my favorite subject, which is SharePoint, and how we can synchronize SharePoint folders to our managed devices.
Awesome.
I say that very tongue-in-cheek because SharePoint is a nightmare and I still don't understand anything about it. But
Sure you do. You know how to map it.
A little bit, yes. And you know what?
Programmatically.
As far as we're talking about today, that's enough.
That's right.
So a little backstory around sort of why we're getting into this. If we're moving into modern management, we are moving away from on-premise file shares. Hopefully, that is the goal. Fingers crossed. So the idea here is that your client or the company that you work for has got a SharePoint environment set up, and they simply want you to synchronize those SharePoint sites and folders onto the local machines.
So basically to replace your drive mappings and things like that.
Exactly. And in a modern way where there is no on-premise infrastructure, so that you can map these drives anywhere in the world.
Perfect.
which is the goal.
That's going to make everybody's life easier.
Exactly. So what I'd like to do initially is just show you how the process looks if you were to just go directly into Intune and map these locations. And then we'll go through the pros and cons of doing it that way, and then the benefits of maybe taking it a step further and doing it more programmatic.
Yep.
So first things first, let me just show you, we've got our Teams channel with Intune.training, and we've created a group and we've created some file shares. So there's a couple of things here that we can see, sample document. There's nothing in them. At this point, it really doesn't matter. The idea here is that we can click in Open in SharePoint and it brings us to that location. So we can see that we have all this information. We've got a couple of really fun things here. So just so that everyone knows, this is what SharePoint looks like in case you've never seen it before. So we're going to take a step back into our Intune environment.
Or did we want to grab the link to sync it locally and show the folks what we're actually trying to do?
Sure, we can do that.
So what we're trying to do here is we're going to hit the sync button, and this is the manual way of doing it. And it'll come up and say open in OneDrive, and we're just going to hit cancel on that, and then we have that library ID. And we'll copy that at the moment, Ben, and we'll use that later on.
We will. And I just want to flag that this is a relatively new ability here, this copy library ID, and we'll talk about the benefits of what this is and what it does and all that sort of stuff in a second.
Do we want to put it into Notepad so we can just show the folks what it looks like?
Yeah, we definitely can. Okay, so I've just hit copy ID. I'm going to open Notepad, and we'll just paste what is in my clipboard.
Cool, and we'll come back to that later.
We will. Okay, so we're going to switch back over to our Azure Portal now, and we're going to go into Intune, and we're going to create
So, Ben, I have to ask, do you use the Azure Portal or do you use DMAC?
I use the Azure Portal, but only because I'm an old school fellow, and I get to say that Intune, the original Intune Portal, is now an old school thing, which is kind of great. I kind of love it. But you know what? You can get the same experience if you use the DMAC Portal as well.
Device management and admin console for those playing at home.
Exactly. But getting to this point is slightly different.
That's right.
So apologies for everyone that only uses the DMAC portal, but we're going to use the classic modern portal.
And the reason why we typically use that, as Ben alluded to, is we've been using this for a few years, but we also do a whole heap of other stuff in Azure Portal, so it's easier for us to just open
Exactly.
Portal.Azure.
It's basically a single pane of management, and that's kind of how I like it.
Yes.
All right, so we're just going to go in and create the policy to synchronize or map these SharePoint folders.
Yep.
So we're going to go into profiles, and we're going to create a new profile, and we're going to call it Win10 SharePoint.
You've got the dash.
I didn't realize we had naming conventions.
We always have naming conventions.
Oh, I see.
Naming conventions are awesome. They make your life so much easier when you do filtering.
Cool, that's good. Okay, so we're calling it Win10 SharePoint example. And what we're going to do here is call it Win10 and later.
Yep.
And we're going to select administrative templates.
So you'll see here, folks playing at home, that there's no settings button there, because by default that doesn't appear until you create the admin template policy.
Exactly.
So what Ben's going to do here now is select Office from the drop down, and you'll see all of the awesome ADMX backed policies as we spoke about on our previous session around this.
Exactly. And just to clarify again, ADMX backed policies are essentially lifted and shifted policies from group policy.
That are then hitting the OMA, URI, WMI class.
Exactly. So this is basically an easy way to create custom policies.
Yes.
Now, if we have a look here, we have 75 pages
Just for Office.
of settings just for Office. Now, that is insane. We don't need to worry about that. The filtering and searching is actually quite powerful. So
Yep.
what we're going to do is we're going to search for the specific thing that we need, which is, Steve?
Site libraries.
Site libraries.
We actually remember this time.
Maybe. All right, so we type in site libraries or thereabouts, and we get two different things. Specifically, the difference between the two is where they're being targeted. One is device and one is user. Now, all that means is if you take it back to the group policy concept, where is it being targeted to? Is it being targeted to the machine or the device or the user? In this case, we want to make sure that we're only targeting the user because modern management is specifically a user-centric management environment.
So one thing to note on that is if we were to deploy this to the device, it would still apply to the user object. What the difference is the same as what we had with group policy, where we could sit there and say, we want it for all devices or we want it for this specific group of users.
Correct.
So what this gives us is the flexibility to say, well, for all devices, we're going to have the home drive mapped, but then we're going to create a separate policy for all of our separate staff or groups and create a user mapped for each of those.
Exactly. So yeah, I guess it really comes down to that mentality that, you know, the user comes first, device control is a later thing. It's not less important, but it is less important in the initial stages of your configuration.
Yep.
So we're going to go ahead and we're going to select the user policy, and we'll see here that we have a bunch of information that comes down from that. Now, all of this is lifted and shifted again from group policy. If you were to find this exact policy in group policy, you would see all of this information. Microsoft have done a really great job to get this ability into Intune.
One thing that I'll add there, Ben.
Yeah.
If you don't see this policy in your group policy, guys, there's a ADMX file that you need to load into your sysvol directory that allows you to see it in group policy. So OneDrive has its own ADMX policy that you need to pull in to update it to the latest
It does,
version.
and it needs to be a certain version for that ADMX policy to exist. It's very complex, but you know what?
There's plenty of blogs out there about it. And
Exactly. But if we're in the realm of modern management, we don't need to worry about that at all. So
That's
10
right.
out of 10 for being with us. So obviously there's a lot of information that's explaining to you what this policy does. And essentially it's just saying that we're going to enable the ability to synchronize folders and sites from SharePoint onto a local machine. We have three options. We have enabled, disabled, or not configured. Obviously by default, it's not configured. Disabled means that we're not allowing that synchronization, and enabled means we are enabling the synchronization. So we're going to hit enabled, and then if we pop down to the bottom here, we can see that we've got a little bit more information. The idea here is now we're defining what sites and what folders from SharePoint that we want to send down to the end user's devices.
So if you look at the second last paragraph, you'll see the copy. No, that's the last paragraph. You'll see the copy library ID reference that we were talking about earlier. So this is where we're going to reuse that bit of string that we created earlier to do that link.
So what we're going to do here is we're going to give it a name. Now this isn't important. It is important for your naming conventions, but as far as making it synchronize, it's irrelevant.
So it's your presentation layer. So this is important to make it so it is understandable for your end user, not necessarily naming convention that matches for IT only.
That's correct. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that it's still in my clipboard. I'm just going to open up the notepad that we copied it into previously. And we'll just pop in here and we'll paste it. And you can see that immediately, as soon as we've put that information in, we've got another field. What this means is that we can actually create an infinite amount of shares that will be mapped to end users' devices.
Please don't.
Keep this as global as possible. The idea being here that unlike previous examples that we've all seen of companies that have very, very obtuse and complex file shares, the idea here is that you should have a global share that everyone has access to.
And then you have per department shares if you need to have additional settings.
Exactly.
HR, finance, those sorts of things.
That's right.
And look, we've all been in that situation where we've had a drive letter for every letter of the alphabet except for C in the login script, and you sit there and go, well, why do we want to reinvent that wheel? When we go to SharePoint, start fresh and just push people to go, make it simple, guys, make it simple.
That's right. So, okay, this obviously seems quite simple. We've gone in, we've found the policy, we've set it to enabled, and then we've put in the path that we've grabbed from our SharePoint environment. Fantastic. Now, what's the point of us having this conversation? It seems so simple. We could have just pointed to a document and had that
this
conversation.
This is the end of the video, right? Like, it's done.
Obviously.
Yeah. No.
Obviously, Steve.
Now,
we've run into a slight problem here where you're only going to find this if you start deploying this out. If I hit OK, everything's fine. We can see that it's enabled and we can go on our merry way. We can select assignments and we can start pushing this out to users. The problem that you will find...
There's a couple of problems.
There's a couple of problems. But the specific problem that you're going to find is that there is an undocumented but very well-known...
character limit.
Sorry, I'm going to step back a little bit here.
For the values that you get in there.
Office. All right, so let's go back here. So we've filled this out. It's fantastic. We've got this here. We're not going to find out exactly what the problem is until we deploy it, but the reality is that there is a character limit on the value of your SharePoint synchronization URL.
And that's in the underlying API for Intune, so for the OMA-WMI object. This is something that I believe Microsoft's aware of and are currently working on. The other one, the other thing that we are trying to push Microsoft to improve is the fact that it takes up to 8 hours for the policy to apply. So in a real world, if we apply this policy and wait 8 hours, we've just had a staff member not able to do their job for 8 hours.
Correct.
Which is not an acceptable policy. So this is why we've looked at alternatives, and we also, let's face it, we put this in, we created our scripted solution before Microsoft added the ADMX back policies.
Correct. So what I'd like to do now is basically just go through and explain why this is such a large path, and then show you what the custom solution is for this, and then we can sort of go from there. So if we go back to our text file and we can actually see, and we can break this out into all the different environments or all the different things, this is essentially the back end of a URL request. And from here we can see all of the information that is required to actually get access to the SharePoint location. It shouldn't take me too long to get all of that. I think that's it.
And version 1.
And version 1. Okay. Okay, so if we have a quick look at the URL that we've copied when we've clicked copy ID from SharePoint, we can see we've got a tenant ID, a site ID, a web ID, list ID, folder ID, web URL, and version number. So all of this information is required so that we can programmatically get access to your SharePoint folders. Obviously, everything is a GUID within reason, but you can start to see how this can quickly add up. If we've got...
So if you cancel it all...
that's not going to work.
Control A, Control V. And then select right at the end, it's 292 characters.
292.
Oh, no, it's 374 for this one.
Oof. Yeah, it's gotten long. It's gotten long. So, and I can't officially state the length because I can never remember it, but off the top of my head, I believe it is 256 characters long.
Or thereabouts.
Or thereabouts. So this is a fairly small URL that I've seen, and it's already over the limit. So what this means is that if we deployed this out right now, it would fail, and we wouldn't be able to know why it failed unless we did some deep diving into trying to identify that just by searching Google or searching Bing to find that information out.
Well, yeah, and basically drilling into the OneDrive engine and going, why did you not sync? Because from an Intune point of view, that policy is set incorrectly. When we go then into the OneDrive, it will sit there and go, I can't find this path.
That's correct.
So let's step across into the PowerShell, Ben, and we'll talk about what we're doing to handle that.
Okay.
Obviously, what we're going to be talking through here with this PowerShell is something that we'll make available via a gist to explain what's going on. So take it away.
Excellent, thanks. So yeah, we obviously ran into this problem fairly early on when we needed to synchronize these SharePoint locations, and basically we realized that we needed to understand how SharePoint libraries get synchronized to devices. So this is where this code comes in handy. We will step into it a little bit, but I will try and keep it as sort of standardized as possible so that we don't lose anyone here. But realistically, what we've got is one function that gets all that information that we looked at in that text file. So the site ID, web ID, list ID, and a couple of other fields that I will show you how to capture. Forms them into that initial URL that we saw.
Plus a little bit extra.
And we'll talk about that in a second.
Primarily being the user email address there.
Exactly. And then it defines the protocol that needs to run on the end user's machine, and it runs that on behalf of the logged on user. So we're talking about realistically less than 45 lines of code to do this work, and I've already written it for you. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how this function works. So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify who the user is. Now, this can be done very, very simply on the machine by running whoami/UPN. Now, whoami, for most people, I'm sure that they've had experience with this. If you type whoami, you get your local machine and the name of the user that is running. Now, obviously, I'm not running as Ben at Intune Training. We're on a producer or a video recording environment.
Yes.
But this is not a UPN.
No.
Whoami now has the functionality. It's not going to work
because there's no user. So because we're using a local account, there is no user principal name. If we were to sign in with an AAD account or an AD account that has a UPN associated to it, we would get the UPN for the email address.
Yeah. Now, the UPN, as a general rule of thumb, is just the email address of the user.
But not always.
Not always, but let's just keep it at that.
Please make sure you keep them consistent.
It is very important for your sanity that you keep them consistent. Now, whoami/UPN will get you out of a lot of trouble a lot of the time, especially in this new modern environment.
Yes.
So whoami/UPN, if we were on a device that was enrolled with a modern account, would give you the email address or the UPN of the account, and then we can work with that. The rest of the things that we need, we can capture from that copy ID. But there's a couple of other extra things that we need that maybe don't always come down. So what I want to show you is how we did it before the copy ID was available. So I'll just go in here.
Yep.
All right. So what we're going to do, so we've gone to the SharePoint location that we want to synchronize to the machine. I'm going to press F12 and just open up the debug pane of. Am I in Chrome? It doesn't matter. Chrome or Edge, Chromium, it's the same engine. It's going to give you the same experience.
Exactly the same.
Exactly. So I'm just going to quickly stop recording, clear this out. I'm going to start recording again, and then I'm going to hit sync. All right. So obviously we've got the open OneDrive thing here. We're going to stop recording, and I'm going to cancel this. Now, all we've done is we've clicked one thing and we can see that we've got a web request that's come through. And it's obviously quite complex and there's a lot of text here. And if we click in here, we can actually look at the information that comes through. And this is the key. to the whole thing working. If we scroll down to the query string parameters, we can see all of that information that we probably also got from the copy ID, plus even more.
Yes.
So we've got user ID, user email, site admin details, site ID, web title, template details, web log URLs. Like we've got icon details that we can identify, and we can customize that as well. Lots and lots of information. So what we've done is we've copied everything, and then we've gone back to our code, and underneath this hash table, I've just pasted the information in.
So, just to play devil's advocate here, Ben, if we didn't want to open up the F12 debugger in Chrome because it's a little bit complicated, can we get this information out of the string where it says copy URI?
Potentially, but I have a feeling that it's missing one or two fields. So let's give it a go.
Yep.
So okay, we've got this information here, and let's just paste it in. And we're already running into some issues. Let's go paste site ID, web ID. So you can see it's obviously a little more complex because you need to format or like pull out folder ID. Yep. And okay, it's fine. So what have we got? Site ID, web ID. We have site ID, web ID. List ID, we have list ID here.
Yep.
User email, we don't have, but we can capture it. We're capturing that above here. Web URL, we have web URL. Web title, we do not have. And list title, we do not have.
Can we make that up?
We can customize this information to a point. The idea here is that the web title and the list title should be, for your own management, the same that is in SharePoint. However, when you map the details, it doesn't matter.
Okay. So what you're saying is I could then go to the website and just go, oh, my website is Intune Training Rocks and my folder is Docs.
Correct.
And it would map it.
100%. Yeah.
So, right, now, one thing that I'm seeing there is we don't have any curly braces, we don't have any slashes, we don't have any semicolons.
That's correct. So this is formatted for web calls, essentially.
Yep.
Now, what we've written in the function that we don't need to get into right now, but what I'm doing is, because we wrote this back when we didn't have the copy ID functionality, in the function, grab the nice formatted thing that makes it very easy and converts it to this.
Yep.
So in theory, we could make it easier so that we could use the copy ID and that sort of stuff. But
so if I was to do find replace as an example is a good way to fix this. So if I want to do replace %2D with dash %7B. So what these are ASCII codes for those playing at home. And this is, look, you can do it either way. I just wanted to highlight that there is, you don't have to go down to pulling this data out this way.
that's correct.
But for what we're doing here, we're just going to copy
What we're
and paste
doing, we're
this
just
way.
going to do it. So, all right, so we've got site ID. So the first thing we want to do is you just grab all of this.
Make sure you grab the curly brace.
Exactly. Web ID. List ID.
Since the path or those two fields don't exist when we go to when we click on the link and copy the link, does that mean that Microsoft is not actually handling that correctly? So when I hit copy or sync locally, why does it not include the web title and the list title?
When you select sync,
Yep.
it does correctly. When you select copy, it is formatting the URL
Okay.
for use in
Yep. Cool.
things like Intune.
Okay. Cool.
So technically it should work. The problem is that limit.
Yep.
That's what causes
Okay,
the problem. Okay. So what I've just done here is I had a nice little formatted thing here where it just replaced the company name, but because we're doing nested folder or site sync, we just want the full path. So it's just.
And we make sure we put that inside quotes.
Of course, double quotes.
Yes.
Okay, web title we've got here. So again, this is where if it didn't match your naming conventions that you wanted to use, you could change this. For example, it's not important, but just understand that the best way to handle this is to keep it default.
Yep.
Okay, so we've captured the information that we need from our debug, and we're just going to delete that. Okay, so this is now fully formed. If I replace user UPN with my details, so user UPN equals Ben at Intune training, and then I fill this out. Yep, that should be right.
So it's important to note Ben's using params, which allows him to do splatting of the policies and configurations into all of his commands that he runs later on.
That's correct. So this is basically a hash file of data that will be used in the function. Now, because I don't actually need to run through the entire function because we're not going to be mapping this on this machine.
Hold on, Ben.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question that I'm sure everybody's going to sit there and go,
yeah, go for
how did you select every line?
Control Alt down allows you to do multi-line select in VS Code. It's one of the greatest things in the world, and if you start using it, you will look like the elitist hacker in the entire universe.
And then we're going to just put a $sign in front of it.
That's correct. So basically what I'm doing here is, because I don't want to splat the data and call the function and all that sort of stuff, I just want these variables. So these are now variables.
Yep.
I'm going to press F8 and I'm going to load them into memory, and we're going to go to the function. I'm just going to show you what the function actually does and what it looks like.
Yep.
So you can see here we've got the parameters, which all of these parameters are the variables that I've just filled in.
Yep. And now we need to build and code our site.
That's correct. So all of these system web HTTP utility things that we're talking about, this is what we were talking about earlier, where if you pressed copy ID, you get that like jumbled URL. This is what this is doing. So it's encoding the content that we're sending to it so that it can be used as a HTTP request.
Nice.
So I'm just going to press F8 again. We're just going to fill all this in, and then we're going to start building the URI or the URL. What we're doing here is we're loading a .NET library called system.uri builder, and the scheme is OD open. Now, what I say by when I say scheme, what I'm talking about is how we actually call this code. So normally a scheme in the web would be HTTP or HTTPS.
Or FTP.
Or FTP or
SFTP,
things like that. Now, OD open is the protocol that is used by OneDrive or OneDrive for Business, so that it can
SharePoint
and
in this
SharePoint.
case.
Well, yeah. So SharePoint uses the OneDrive protocol on Windows 10 machines to initiate synchronizers. So what we're essentially saying here is use OneDrive to synchronize this query.
Yep.
So this query is all of the variables that we've captured from SharePoint.
Yep.
That's the easiest way that I can explain it. So we're using OneDrive to synchronize this.
Yep. So now if we hit F8 on that line, and then we bring back the $URI to string if we can.
Let me clear this, and then we go URI. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If once you create a URI using that .NET library, it actually gets, there's a lot more information than just the URL. So if we put this in, we can see all sorts of information. We can see the host, path, query, scheme, all sorts of stuff.
Didn't go in right.
No, so we want to go, it didn't go in right?
No.
It went in right.
Scheme is HTTP.
That's okay. It's using the host as, let's have a look here.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. It didn't save for some reason. That's okay. So what we're actually going to do is, so we can see here.
To string.
No, we want to go.
Well, that's what we're using everywhere else.
I know, but if we go into URI.URI, we get even more information.
Correct.
So what we actually want is the original string, so the fully formatted...
like the original recipe.
Exactly. So URI.URI.original string gives us the URL that will actually synchronize the path for us. So if we were to go into here and go into run, so Windows R to open up run, and paste this in, we get OneDrive popping up on our computer. I don't know who I'm signed in on this machine, so I don't know whether this is going to work or not.
you, and you've already synced the drive
I haven't synced the drive.
in the demo, in the prep.
Potentially.
It's all good.
But this is conceptually, this is what's happening in the back end of this code. So we're doing this silently, so we don't get that notification because we're using single sign-on and ADL libraries and all that sort of shiny stuff. But the idea here is that when you type in that OD open in the run window, it is immediately talking to OneDrive and saying, what would you like me to do?
Yep.
And all this function is doing is identifying what we want to do, which is we want to synchronize this path.
Yep.
Everything else is just error handling. It can be as complicated as you want, but realistically this works.
Yep. Cool. Awesome, Ben. That's fantastic. So I think that makes for a great video. So appreciate you filling in for Adam at the last minute. Obviously, this
Anytime.
is going to be coming out a little bit late. So where can we find you on the web?
So I have a blog that I unfortunately very rarely update, but I'm hoping to improve that as we go along, which is just powers-hell.com, which is a fantastic name. And I also have a Twitter, which is powers_hell, for anyone that enjoys non-uniform social media presence.
And I'm Steve Hosking, and you can find me at On-Prem Cloud Guy. And you can obviously also find Adam at Adam Gross TX. All the details are underneath there. Thanks for your time today, Ben. And
thank you.
I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Definitely.